Hi there, how's it going? Andrew here with another painting tutorial, and in this video we're going to carry on with the painting process, picking up from where we left off in the block-in. Now, if you haven't seen the block-in video where I'm painting a round wave, make sure you watch that first. I've put a link to it down below, and I'll also link to it at the end of this video. But the modeling process, which we're going to talk about now, is carrying on from that blocking in. And again, this painting process that I normally use is split up into three parts: blocking in, modeling, and then detail. Let's get started. Now let's just jog our memory here and go over the photographic reference that I've been using to paint this painting, along with my original digital drawing that I've used as a design and a guide for the overall image. This painting is of an area called Owhiro Bay in Wellington, New Zealand. It's a really dynamic seascape down here with plenty of jagged rocks and a rough sea to meet them. And I happen to catch the light at just the right moment. And what I really want to focus on in this painting is that crashing wave with the light shining through the wave. Now, in the modeling stage, I'm going to have an opportunity to manipulate those colors and tones a little bit more and increase the dynamic energy of this scene. Now, the round shape of the canvas is a bit of a variation for me from the normal squares and rectangles that I'm used to working on, but I feel this shape lends itself to this wave scene. Now, you'll notice in this demonstration that my palette of colors is going to change somewhere through the middle, but the main colors that I'm using that are predominantly found in this scene are a series of trusty seascape blues. I'm using turquoise phthalo, phthalo blue, cobalt teal, and cobalt blue, along with aerolide yellow and quinacridone magenta. And then the two whites that I'm using predominantly are zinc white and titanium white. Now, my mediums here are made by Langridge handmade oil colors, and I'm using Oleogel and Impasto medium. These mediums are extraordinary and they handle very well, and they feel like a traditional oil medium. They dry slowly over a period of days, which is going to allow me plenty of working time for a scene like this. Oleogel is designed to be used in very thin layers. It's got a nice smooth buttery consistency, and it can be a little bit misleading when you're squeezing it out of that tube because it comes out pretty thick. But if we keep our layers thin, then we're going to avoid running into any cracking or crawling that can occur down the track. Impasto medium, on the other hand, is designed specifically for thick paint, and you'll notice I'm going to use plenty here in this demonstration to improve that impasto consistency to create some sharp and thick highlights to catch that light. So just like with the block-in, I'm going to start with whatever's furthest away and begin to work my way forward. So the most distant element within this scene is, of course, the sky. This is a simple combination of some gray tones that I've mixed using ultramarine blue, burnt umber, cobalt teal, and a touch of quinacridone magenta. I'm using a nice broad bristle flat brush here, along with a really broad bristle wedge brush. And again, for the brushes, check the link in the description below. I'm using broad hatching motions with the brush and working two edges into each other simultaneously. The edge along the lead of the lip of the wave is blended up into the sky. Now, I'm using pretty big brushes not only for the block-in, but for this first stage of the modeling process as well. The bigger brushes allow me to cover a lot of ground quickly. I should also note that the medium that I'm using for this modeling process is Langridge Oleogel along with Langridge Impasto. In some of the areas where I want the paint a little bit thinner and have a little bit more flow, I'm using Oleogel. And then for thicker paint, I'm using Impasto. The Impasto will retain my brushwork and also add to the character of the surface of the painting. Now, the Oleogel and Impasto will allow me to have about 4 to 5 days of working time. But overall, this modeling process should only take about 6 hours. If I was working with Liquin Original made by Winsor & Newton, which I do often use, this I would have only about 3 hours of working time before it started to go sticky and the surface would no longer be workable. So using these language mediums allows just a little bit more manipulating time on the surface of the painting. Now I'm going to start working into the trough and introduce a little bit of darker tone and some more of that bottle green color. For this, I'm going to be using a little bit of phthalo blue. And this, in conjunction with ultramarine blue and a little bit of that aerolite yellow, will form a nice base to anchor this wave and give it a little bit more mass and depth. I can carry this color on up into the lip of the wave to emphasize that curling character. And then by lifting the tone slightly and adding just a little bit more aerolite yellow with titanium white, I can achieve a bit of that glassy look of light coming through the wave. I go about changing and adjusting my edges slightly by working this color in to that white water that I achieved earlier. Now let's take a closer look at how I'm mixing some of these colors. I don't just make one puddle of color and manipulate that, but rather work in zones so I have a wide range of colors available to me to go ahead and continue to add piece by piece by piece. Now some of that lighter color that you saw there was a combination of titanium white and that aerolite yellow with a touch of that cobalt teal. Cobalt teal is fantastic for creating some really cool seascapes and this glassy effect of light coming through a wave. Now the entire wave zone is pretty wet and I can continue to work this color back and forth, add some bits to it and manipulate my tones and my colors more. This is helping me achieve that lightness and that glow coming through, and you'll notice that the brushwork is still pretty chunky and pretty rough. I want a little bit more of a painterly characteristic to come through in this piece, and also have the viewer see a real sense of texture and some evidence of how the painting was made when they look close. Now in some of these areas we've got to deepen that tone and increase a little bit more of that bottle green aspect. So you'll notice I'm using plenty of that turquoise phthalo and aerolite yellow. I'm occasionally mixing in some bits of oleo gel to just make sure I've got enough medium in that mix to improve the flow and the consistency of the paint. I often get asked, how do I know how much medium to add? And generally I just go by feel. Now we've got to be careful with the oleo gel and the impasto medium that we don't overextend this. If we mix too much, it can have some pretty disastrous effects with yellowing. As a general rule of thumb, I try not to exceed 2 parts paint to 1 part medium. After running some pretty extensive tests with this medium made by Langridge, I've had great success at keeping it at around that 3 parts paint to 1 part medium. All you need is just a little bit on the end of your brush to mix in to improve that flow and consistency. Now you'll notice here, I'm starting to elevate the tone along the lip of that wave. I always save my tonal best for last, and you'll notice that as this painting progresses, the darks are going to get a little bit darker and the lights a little bit lighter. Taking a closer look here, you can see how I can manipulate some wet brushwork in with surrounding marks. As I feel a little bit more comfortable with where the painting's going, I'll reduce the size of the brush and make finer marks. So again, we're starting really loose and we're working our way towards something more refined. Because I mix colors in such a way that I'm preserving reservoirs of paint, I can work both my lights and darks simultaneously, bringing edges together. And you'll notice here that I'm using these dagger wedge brushes in such a way that I can use that broadside as a blending implement, and I can also draw and point the brush to form some more refined lines like I'm doing right here. In some of these places where I've got a little bit of a lighter tone of white water down in that trough, I'm going to allow a little bit more thickness to come through so these areas of paint catch light. So to achieve that thickness, I'm not using the oleo gel, I'm using the Langridge Impasto medium. Now with the number 2 wedge brush, I can go and work the splashed edge of the lip of the wave with even brighter tone, and you'll notice the thickness of some of these marks. Again, these thick marks are going to catch that light. I'll never just leave a brush mark where it is though once it hits the canvas. I always go back and blend into those marks and manipulate edges. There's a fine line between an impasto mark being of service and being a hindrance. Always check the marks that you're making from a distance and see that they're reading well. By stepping away from the canvas, we can tell if we're on the right track or not. Now, though some of these marks that I'm laying down now might look really bright, they're far from pure white. And this fugly little brush that I'm using is that trimmed fan that we were talking about earlier. This has got a really nice flex to it and is going to allow me to create some droplets and splashes and a really nice broken edge to make this water down here in the trough appear a little bit more turbulent. And again, because of the medium and the slow drying time, it means that I can continually blend one edge into another. I'm using titanium white here and a little bit of aerolite yellow and cobalt teal to form a bit more electricity to go along that lip of the wave and just improve that transparent look as this wave curls over and crashes towards the viewer. I'm going to apply this only to the top edge of that wave. And again, because everything's slightly wet and a little bit more malleable, I can blend this downwards into that trough and achieve a transition of tones from very bright all the way into that deep green in the trough. A bit of phthalo blue and a little bit of cobalt teal blends into this color really nicely, and then I can gradually bring this downwards. I've probably spent thousands of dollars on brushes, but it's kind of funny here, sometimes the worst brushes make the best kind of marks. Using the same brush, we're going to turn up the volume and add a little bit more light tone for the highlight region in the trough. By manipulating tone in this way, gradually and slowly, it allows us to sculpt a three-dimensional form. If we blew out that tonal dynamic too early, we would have nowhere to go. Now, working directly over the dried block-in layer, let's start to bring these techniques forward. I'm working in this flat section here just in front of the wave, and I'm going to start to introduce some of those colors that we had in the breaking wave and communicate this as a flat plane sitting directly in front of that curl. But here, all of my marks need to be stretched out and appear a little bit more horizontal because we're looking at a flat plane nearly edge on. And by paying attention to the way I make these brush marks, I can also communicate that form so it sits flat directly in front of this wave. Now, to achieve some of these marks, I'm using my dagger again and dragging the brush along. In some places we have to lift up the water, and where this occurs we're going to have a shadow, and to mix that I'm using ultramarine blue with a touch of quinacridone magenta and of course plenty of titanium white. Once I'm happy with where everything's going, I can then add little chibbly marks of highlights, again going back and reworking some of these marks with a darker shadow color, blending little pieces in with one another just to make sure it reads well. As I look back from a distance, I'm not too happy with the way the curling wave reads, so I'm just going to add a little bit more color to this area. I thought maybe adding a touch more aerolite yellow might increase the electricity and that intense light coming through. Now it appears to be overly stated at this stage, but I'm going to go back and rework a little bit of this aerolite yellow with a bit more titanium white. But as I introduce more and more color, this area in the breaking wave is going to register a little bit better. Now, of course, contrast can go a long way, and one of the things I realized I was missing here was a bit of that darker tone in the trough as well as along the lip of the wave. Some of these bottle greens that I'm adding now are just anchoring the wave a little bit more and making it appear a bit stronger on the canvas. Now, there's an area of white water that's been lifted up directly in front of this rock, and I've been inspired by my photographic reference to just mix some of these colors to manipulate that white water to make it appear as if it is lifting up and catching the light with a little bit of light shining through. So I'm going to use a bit of a subdued yellowy gray color mixed with a bit of zinc white this time, and zinc white's great because it's nice and transparent and is not as punchy as the titanium white. So this yellow color can go along the lead edge of some of these white water pieces that have lifted up. And because it's nice and translucent, it's going to give the appearance that light is coming through that water. Simultaneously, I can mix highlights and add these to the lead edge and then deepen some of the colors down in the troughs as well, just manipulating this as a three-dimensional form. Now, it's easy to become disillusioned in the very beginning with a painting if we don't know the process or the method and we're not too sure about where this whole thing's going. Sometimes you can have the tendency to want to have this thing look perfect from the outset. This is very difficult as a painter, of course, unless you're a photorealist, and you can see here what I'm trying to do is go for more of an impressionistic technique. So having a little bit of faith in the methodology here is key. I'm okay with it looking loose in the beginning, knowing that I'm going to go back and refine that. And one of the things that helps with that, of course, is just having experience. But in the beginning, let me just urge you to stick with it and just keep refining and keep working on that painting until it turns a corner and you're happier with it. The worst thing we can do is give up too early. Now there's an area of white water that's rolling in here that's nice and broken and has got plenty of energy to it. Again, I'm working with some broader brushes and then working towards more refined marks with a smaller number 2 dagger bristle brush. To create that broken edge, again, I'm going back to that chopped and trimmed fan brush to just feather out that lead edge and make it break apart the way water would. But while I've got some of this color on my palette and there's still plenty of working time due to the slow drying paint, I'm going to just communicate this swirling white water and these windows in the white water here in the direct foreground. Some of these lines formed by the windows and these tendrils of white water are going to form an important vector to lead the eye in to the painting and direct the viewer's attention towards that breaking wave in the background. Again, I'm bringing my edges together and I'm making everything just a little bit sharper here. This area in the direct foreground is going to receive my darkest darks and my lightest lights. But it's time to just step back and have a look and see if this thing is going to work from a distance. And it's important to always view our work from a distance to make sure that we're on the right track. Our featureless rocks need just a touch more detail and a little bit more emphasizing here and there where the lead edge of the rock is going to be catching some highlight. To mix these highlights, I'm using a little bit of that cadmium red and titanium white along with some aerolite yellow. I just love that relationship between water and rock, especially when they meet with such force and energy. Painting splashes can really make a seascape, and here again I'm just breaking this edge with my trimmed fan brush. This can create these little droplets that occur along the lead edge of some of these areas of whitewater. So I'm pretty happy with the modeling section so far. I think it's going to make a great base to carry on with some finer details. At this stage, I'm going to let the painting dry and cure so it goes nice and hard, and that way when I add the final detail marks, I'm not going to disturb this underlying layer. As a base, it's not bad for this sitting. Now if you enjoyed this video, then make sure you leave me a thumbs up. If you want to come back for more, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. And as always, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook. But also, make sure you're subscribed through my website at andrewtischler.com for bonus content. I look forward to seeing you next time. So long.